And welcome back to the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi. And that was an interesting debate, and we're definitely going to try to get these two guys back on, Rudy and Mr. Batty, next week to continue this. And again, when you ask questions, direct questions, nobody can answer them. But I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just going to calm down here. We got our next guest here, Rebekah Roth. She's the author of Methodical Illusion, methodicalillusion.com, and she's joining us now via Skype. And Mrs. Roth, how are you doing?
Doing great, thank you.
All right, great. And so you got this great book. I mean, it's selling off the shelves, I heard, and you're getting a lot of attention going on all kinds of radio shows like this one and everything. And I mean, you're getting a lot of success, and truth is success. And that being speaking, you want to give an introduction to yourself for us?
Well, I sure can. I started, I actually had flown for about 30 years at the time of 9/11, so I retired in 2004. I just couldn't handle it any longer. All the changes that took place after 9/11. And I was that one person that everyone always said, oh, you need to write a book. And so after I stopped flying and could start reflecting a little bit, one day I thought, well, I'll start writing that novel and see what comes up. And I had started, and then I in my mind, you know, as you write, you kind of start creating characters and little things for them to do, little experiences. And I decided I wanted to use a Middle Eastern name for a gentleman character in my story. And so I Google searched the 19 hijackers of 9/11. And lo and behold, if I didn't see right there in front of me a BBC article from like around the 21st, maybe the 23rd of September 2001, announcing that several of the hijackers were alive. And I had been in what's often referred to as cognitive dissonance. So I had, after I left and while I was flying, I just couldn't choose to look into it, even though I saw red flags and I knew there were things that were truly impossible on that day. When you are doing that for a living, and you're told that the FAA and NORAD and the U.S. Navy are going to scramble jets to keep you and your passengers safe, that's your safety net. And on 9/11, I think we all saw that that didn't happen. And so it was really uncomfortable to go back to work. But I made it, and I did go back for a few years. And then when I saw that, I thought, well, that's odd. And then I read that the Saudi Arabian government was suing the FBI over this, that they had stolen the names and identities, including home addresses and passport photos, of 4 of their pilots associated with Saudi Air, and that's a government-owned airline. And then I started to remember how Interpol and the FAA had warned us in the mid-90s of a group or a team of people that were going around in several U.S. cities, and at least 1 or 2 cities in Europe also were mentioned, that we should always really guard our passports and our airline ID, and to take that with us if we went out shopping or out to dinner on our layovers, because there was a group of people stealing those identities. Well, I guess some of the Saudi air pilots had their passports stolen, and the FBI, lo and behold, ended up claiming that they were one of the 19 hijackers. I actually continued to do that research, and I just like cracked the cosmic egg for me, because I was like, well, how did they live through that? And I remember a couple passports made it, but I just thought, well, that's impossible. Then there's something really wrong. And at that point, I started to wake up and started to do the research. And then it just went. I spent thousands of hours digging and digging and digging. And what I kept going back to was my airline training, what the FAA protocols were at the time, what the flight attendant should have been saying and doing at that time in the flight, that they were supposedly on the phone, what would be going on as far as the aircraft climbing or descending. And then I grabbed the National Transportation Safety Board documentation for at least 3 of the flights. I still can't find it on the Flight 93, but I've got lots of other documents. And I started to see that, wow, these planes are doing things like, for instance, descending rapidly. And I was saying 6 to 10,000 feet a minute rapidly. And when you get in a descent like that, it's hair-raising. You would have people screaming. And the last thing you would be doing was sitting on the phone, making the type of phone calls that these passengers and even some of the flight attendants were making. So I just kept seeing all these things that were wrong. And then, of course, I think everybody knows that cell phones still to this day, unless you're on a specially equipped aircraft, just didn't work at altitude. And so I kept going back to the messages on the calls, and then figuring out that what happened, how it happened. And basically what I did was I figured it out. And now I gathered all this information after thousands of hours of making charts and putting timelines together. And then I thought, well, how am I going to deliver this? Because it's hair-raising. And so I decided, kind of a little bit out of protection for my own self and my own family, to do this as a novel. And then I offered to the reader, if they have questions or they want to see things, because a lot of the information that's in there pertaining to 9/11, I actually used official FBI documents for. So if they have a question, I'll send them the documents that I found and links to it, or the actual documents if they want to see that. But so far, now we are #1 in the historical fiction section on Amazon for about 10 days, I guess now. And then we're doing really well also in Barnes & Noble on their books. And we're just so getting the response is so incredible that people are just stepping forward with offering their expertise. They're air traffic controllers, they're FAA employees, they're people that were in certain areas of the airlines involved, flight attendants, pilots, dispatchers. And so lots of people are coming forward to me with lots of information and putting 2 and 2 together. So I have no doubt at all now that the theory that I expose in the book is actually what happened and how it was done.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of information, and I'm pretty well versed with the whole 9/11 thing. I've been holding rallies, truth awareness rallies, every year for about 5 years now, and we're going on our 6th year, I believe, whatever. But holding these rallies, and every year when we first started out, you get about 60% of people agree with you. We got called lunatics, and some people actually almost got into a fight with us. And but after that, I mean, like as the years progressed, I mean, especially last year, I think we had maybe 2 people that said something derogatory against us, and everybody's like, "Yeah, I believe it," or I don't believe there was terrorists involved. Especially the younger kids, they automatically say, "Oh, we know the government was involved with this," and I mean, because I tell people on my show, all it takes is do your own investigation. And what woke me up, I worked for American Airlines as a ramp coordinator, supervisor, and all that. I worked on the ramp, did the flight operations. I worked for Cape Air, Delta Airlines. I've been all over the airport, and I was even talking to some of the airline pilots, and none of it made sense. I said, just put everything aside for a minute and think about this rationally. It's like, it just breaks all the laws of physics, all the laws of aviation. And again, I'm a private pilot myself, and a lot of training within the aviation field. And for the official story, even 6 of the 10 now don't even believe in it now, but the official story, it would have to break the laws of aviation, the laws of physics, for this to actually happen. Your thoughts on it?
It's true. That's very true. And I have actually been very, 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 I'm pleasantly surprised to say that I really thought that people were going to come at me with full of hate because my story, what happened and how it happened and what happened to the passengers and where they were brought to the planes, and that is not the official story by quite a long shot, but it's probably, and I've actually got someone that contacted me that was actually at the location. So it's pretty well confirmed now between all of the people stepping up that this is exactly what happened. I have a lot of people who say, I can't believe a flight attendant figured this out. But part of the reason I chose the puzzle piece, as you can see here behind me, the cover of the book, is that it is the missing piece of the 9/11 puzzle. And one of the things I discovered as I was researching was so many people that were trying to do the research that had never been in the inside guts, like I know you have, of the airport, and how people can gain access, where the security is, where it's not, what it means to be an airline employee when we start checking in for flights. And I was reading where people thought that the crews were in on it and that they were fake and they were voice morphed and just crazy stuff. And that Flight 11 and 77 didn't operate because American Airlines didn't put them in the BTS statistics. And if you're not involved with the airline, you don't know what BTS is. And BTS basically was designed in the early to mid 90s, and it was designed as a way to compile online departures and online arrivals so that the airlines could use that information in their advertising. And if you really wanted to be on the #1 airline for arrivals or departures or both, you would choose that one that was serving that commercial to you. And that's all it was. And so the reason that people get really confused that Flight 77 and Flight 11 didn't even operate that day is that because of that BTS document, well, those numbers are based on flight numbers. And so I try to put this out kind of like, you know, when somebody gets into the Hall of Fame or a very famous ball player has an accident or dies, and they honor that person by retiring their sports jersey number. Well, after an accident, would you buy a ticket for Flight 11 on American Airlines or Flight 77? You'd look at your boarding pass and get the creeps from what happened that day. And it's kind of that way with any time there's a crash. So they knew that they probably were not going to use those flight numbers for a heck of a long time, so they were no longer able to keep the data for that flight. So it wasn't important to add that data to the BTS. The BTS is not something you have to do, and they just chose not to. And you have to understand, too, that what was going on that day with American and United, lots of things were happening in the corporate level, in dispatch, operations, the vice presidents, all the way up to the CEO. And so there's lots of stuff going on. And the person whose job it was may have just been told, you know what, don't even bother putting that data in the BTS because there's not going to be an arrival time. And so that's that. And so I was seeing a lot of things that people that aren't in the airline don't understand. And another thing, as far as people guessing that the crew members were either in on it or didn't exist at all because the flights didn't take off. Well, I am here to tell you that since this book came out, I have been contacted by more than a dozen American Airlines employees, some of which were very dear friends with the passenger or the flight attendants and the pilots on those planes. So I'm here to tell you that those people actually are no longer here on Earth. And they really did go to work on that day. They thought they were going to work. Flight 11 and Flight 77 were both daily operations. They operated every day, and that was just a standard kind of thing. And all airlines have that. I know you know this, Dan. If you worked for an airline, you've always got trip 77, 78, and you know that's from point A to point B and back to your base. And so, you know, whether it's 11 and 12 or 8, 7 and 8 or, you know, 3 and 4, those are how the flight trips for the crew members work. One of the other things that people don't understand is when a flight attendant or a pilot has a schedule, has a trip scheduled, whether it's been given to them the day before, 2 hours before, or the month before in their airline working bidding. We bid for our month a month in advance. Usually by the 25th of the month, we know what we're doing the following month. So if I were to have, let's say, a 7 a.m. departure, by 5 a.m. I would be, as a flight attendant or purser or pilot, working that flight. I would be phoning into the airline to a crew scheduler and saying, this is Rebekah Roth. My number is 876592. That's my employee number. That's how they talk to the company. And the fact that the flight attendants that called in from their phone calls on their hijacking and they never gave their employee numbers was another key factor. And if you've worked for an airline, you know that you are your first and last name, and then you're an employee number, and sometimes you even give your employee number first. So you would start talking to the company about 2 hours prior to your scheduled departure. At that time, they'd say your flight's scheduled on time 7 a.m. Then you get to the airport and you have to go to an office where you gather paperwork and information about your passengers, maybe bad weather, who your pilots are going to be, and the whole list of crew names that you're going to be with. And so that usually takes place an hour to an hour and a half before departure. So there's so many people that you touch bases with as an employee, as a crew member, and I just started seeing that people were just, since they didn't know that, they were just creating these stories of, well, they used voice morphing. They just monitored their phone calls and used their voice, so they weren't even there. But no, in fact, they really were. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to write this story, and it really does start out how airlines handle how they handle emergencies. Another thing that I saw on the morning of 9/11, luckily I was home, and I watched the second plane or whatever it was hit the tower, the South Tower. And then I just glued myself to this because, lo and behold, I never had ever been told about Osama bin Laden or the group Al-Qaeda. I had just 2 months before been in my recurrent training where we studied who the hijackers du jour were, and that the names never came up. I was never told that they were suspecting them hijacking aircraft, who they were, the name of the group. I was so blown away when I sat there watching television. I mean, well, I just flew in the day before from Europe. I was the purser on the flight. If the FAA knew this was coming, why didn't they give me a directive yesterday? This was like I wasn't even home 12 hours. And so I started to see that there was some things that were just really amiss. And those things that just kept popping up as I continued my research, I found connections to corporations and people. And then I found things as far as an airline employee and a flight attendant that just could not be. So I kept on going.
Well, you're right. I mean, like in the airport, a lot of people don't understand what goes on behind the scenes, and it is literally like the military, because you do use military 24-hour time, you use Zulu time, and you use the phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc. You know, I mean, and everything's like from operations to the bag room to the ticket counter, even to the flight attendants, and everything is done by the book to the T. I mean, everything's logged, and even when you serve food and everything else, it's all logged. And, so it's done by the T. So you're definitely right on the standards of, airport operations. And, I've been involved with the airport for almost 20 years. I, again, work for all those airlines, and I'm a pilot myself, but not for an airline. And, when I started, I got, because the thing is, America got jumped by how do you say it, the patriotism and the emotions were involved with it. Oh my God, because I was outside with the flag too the next day, with the rest of the people on the streets all saying we got to go after those terrorists. I even went down to the recruiting station, and thank God, I didn't go in, but and I started analyzing, wait a minute, this don't make sense. When I started really analyzing things, just from that kind of aviation perspective, then talking to other pilots, and I talked to a fighter pilot too, and that was a fighter pilot, and he was the airline pilot captain for American Airlines, and he said I couldn't even do that. And with the the official story with their plane hitting the Pentagon, 50 feet off the ground, and not one car flipped, and how many times over the years as planes flew in too low on final approach, half that speed, and ripped shingles off people's roofs because of the weight turbulence. But not one car in that parking lot was flipped, they put on these didactics with the poles tipping. Those poles should have been out of that parking lot, like Adam Vinatieri kicking a field goal in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? And so it's just like a lot of things that don't make sense. And we were mentioned earlier about the FBI. Now, people, if you don't believe her, the FBI, they admitted themselves that these terrorists, the so-called terrorists that were on these planes, one was a computer engineer or whatever in Brazil, and they were on the most wanted list. So how were you on the most wanted list, alive and well, stated by the FBI, but yet you flew a plane into a building? And when the plane exploded, they said they found the passports of the terrorists. When everything else burned into flames and ashes, they found an unmolested passport. I mean, like, it's just question after question that arises. And I haven't got a chance to read your book yet, and I can't wait. And yeah, but I mean, like, the information we've been talking about so far is amazing. It really is. And now you're with all your qualifications and expertise in the airlines, how long did it take you to start realizing, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong here?
The minute I discovered that BBC article that those guys were still alive, then I started to dig. And when I did, I found that actually 10 of them for sure are alive. And there's some people that really feel that the other 9 were just make-believe. Since my book has come out, I've been contacted by someone who claims to have one of the only copies of the original passenger manifest. There are no Arab names on that, on any of the real manifests. So there's all kinds of stuff like that. Well, I immediately dove into this once I realized that those people were still alive, at least 6 to 10 of them. Then I thought, well, this just can't be. And then I started to dig. And then what I found was interesting things, like that there was missing gold from the vaults under Building 4 and Building 6, and that there was an investigation going on to a misplaced $2.3 trillion by the Pentagon. And that was announced the day before, and nobody ever looked back to see what happened to that $2.3 trillion from the Pentagon. And then I found out that the Office of Naval Investigation, which is exactly where the 757 was supposed to have hit, was the office investigating not just the missing 2.3 trillion, but the you'll remember Enron and the WorldCom and Global Crossing investigations were also being done throughout there, and it was relating to some of the politicians in our country. And so I started to see things, and then reading things like insurance fraud, where the actual companies that were struck head on by the 2 planes in both towers had been taking out large life insurance policies on their employees, and the company would be the beneficiary. And it raised a red flag with an underwriter. And when they took that information to the FBI in Texas, the underwriter was harassed and ran out of the country, and I believe still living in south of the border somewhere. And there were so many things, the stock options and all of the SEC. And then I read about these things called Brady bonds that Bush Sr. had done. And they were fake, fraudulent gold paper bonds and stolen gold to the tune of $240 billion worth of gold that needed to be folded back into a very tightly monitored gold market. And so you remember on that day, the SEC went into emergency shutdown mode. And there was this big financial crisis with the SEC. Well, a lot of that was done so that these Brady bonds, which, by the way, were maturing on September 12th, 2001. So I started to find all this stuff, and I just kept digging. Luckily, my husband was supportive because I was into it big time, and 20 hours a day reading it. Every hour I was awake, I was just consuming more information and digging down, the rabbit hole on one thing or the other. From I said, how could somebody put options on a airline worth 2,500 times more than the normal put options and never collect that? Where does that money go? And not have some type of an electronic trail. Somebody knows something. They don't just disappear. Apparently that money's never been collected that I've found, and nobody can tell who made it. Well, how could you not tell? Everything's done on a computer, certainly was by then for those kind of transactions. So I started finding more and more anomalies like that. And then if you just go back now, part of my airline training, every year we have what's called recurrent training. And in that training, we study crashes. So we know how to help get the passengers out. And if, like for instance, let me just say, on a DC-10 years ago, whenever there was a crash or a problem, with the DC-10. The tail, remember, that was one that had the gigantic engine on the tail.
Yeah.
And that tail was so heavy because of that gigantic engine up there, it would crack the fuselage back by door 5. And so that's how a lot of people actually evacuated from DC-10. So we would know this information. So we would know, okay, if the door won't open, just go out the crack, because the tail always fell off, just like an egg would crack because of the weight. And so there are things like that that we would always study. We studied crashes, landing on the water. You'll remember when U.S. Airways landed on the Hudson. All of that was reviewed every year with every flight attendant, as well as hijacking procedures. And this is where I kept going back, and I kept thinking, well, the flight attendants, why would they be on the phone? That'd be the last thing you'd do. And on Flight 11, those girls were on the phone for half an hour. And first off, there's no cell phone that could keep reception like that. They were 20 minutes after takeoff, which should have put them at almost cruise altitude, certainly well above 25,000 feet, somewhere between 25,000 and 35,000 around the time they were beginning their phone calls, and then they were on for a half an hour. So cell phones just worked at the time. Now, I know there's different technology today, but at the time of 2001, cell phones only worked by the ground towers. Yeah. And so while you're going, 400 or 500 miles an hour, you just can't stay in touch with the tower. So what I found, and I did this because I was on the plane a lot, and I was always curious if it would work, the technology would work. So all the flight attendants and pilots knew this, that after about 15 to 1,800 feet, now this is not very far off the ground, you have no cell reception, even today, unless you're on a satellite, especially satellite equipped that can hook onto some kind of G network through a satellite technology. But on those days, about 15 to 1,800 feet, you lost your reception. And oftentimes your cell phone would just say the word forbidden across the screen if you tried it, at altitude. It's like, no, forbidden. And that's the message that your phone would give you. So knowing that, and then finding all of these crazy things, all this financial transactions, the stolen gold and precious metals, and then finding out that the business or the politicians involved, governments involved. The Saudi government threatened to sue the FBI, and they never fixed that. And after my book came out, I actually found a book by Paul Zaremka, and it talks about the economic effects of 9/11. And it's written by several authors. David Ray Griffith has a little thing in there, and Paul Zaremka. One of the things they talked about was that, and I didn't even know this story, initially on 9/11, we were told that there were 19 hijackers. Well, the 4 original names, this is really interesting, changed, and we didn't even know it. Because to us, all Arab names probably sound alike unless you're an Arab. So we hear Al-Hamzi or Al-Omari or a name like that, and it just doesn't stick with us. Plus, we were also traumatized. We were just so blown away that they could strike the most protected building in the world, our Pentagon. We were all blown away. And so as Americans, we were traumatized. So we were going to believe anything that we were being brainwashed and led to believe that day. And so since we were so blown away and not really paying close attention, the FBI originally had 4 names on this list of 19 hijackers. One of them ended up being an FAA aviation safety expert, employee of the FAA in Florida, and his last name was Bukhari, and his brother that the FBI claimed was on the manifest. This is they're saying these are the guys who were on the manifest. These are our hijackers. Now, this information came out within 12 hours probably of the planes crashing. So he shows up at the FAA and says, "Wait, no, I wasn't a hijacker. I'm alive. I didn't get on the plane. I didn't buy a ticket. I didn't have a thing to do with it." And his brother, who they claim, the FBI now is claiming they know who the hijackers are. And here's 2 of them. They're brothers. His brother had been dead in a small plane crash a year earlier. Wow. And so he said, my brother couldn't have been on it either because he's dead. And then the 2 other gentlemen, I forgot their last names now, showed up. also at their local FBI and said, no, here's our alibi. This is what we do for a living, and we weren't a part of these airplanes. So they quickly changed the story. And the Bukhari brothers actually owned originally the Mohammed Atta rental car story with the Koran and the flight logs, or the flight bag and all of the will and testament. That whole entire story originally belonged to those two brothers. So they just switched out with Mohammed Atta with that. That's just crazy. And I don't think many people really know that. I didn't ever find that until I'd actually finished the book.
General public, they just hear terrorists and they don't really pay attention to names, and because all the propaganda being put into people's heads that a terrorist, when stats prove you got I think 100 times more chance of getting killed by a cop than a terrorist. But if you want to hold it,
definitely.
If you want to hold right there for a minute, we do got to go to a break, and we'll be right back with Rebekah Roth. We'll check our website out. We're on the break, methodicalillusion.com, and we'll be right back on the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi. And welcome back to the Truth Radio Show. We're joined with Rebekah Roth, Methodical Illusion, author of Methodical Illusion. And check her out, methodicalillusion.com. And Rebekah, continue where you left off. I forgot where he left off, I'm sorry. But it's just a lot of information, it really is. And if people actually looked into the stuff, the general public, just look into these small little things. These small things add up, and these small things are huge, really big things. And when you put, common sense to it, it's like, and science too. All these things, and you come to find out, wow, this is just a big lie. This whole 9/11 attack, whatever. And but anyway, continue where you left off.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, one of the things that I kept going back to, I jokingly say, I just kept putting my old flight attendant shoes on and walking down that aisle of each of those planes. I had all the details of those phone calls, what was supposedly going on, and then I charted up what the National Transportation Safety Board and the FAA said the plane was doing, and things were just not working out. They just, you're not going to come out of the sky 10,000 feet a minute without every passenger screaming on board, and this stuff I know. And so I thought all these things were not coming together. And another thing that I think people really need to know, I think this is very helpful for people to know, and this is what I was using. When a flight attendant or a pilot dons their uniform, they stop becoming that mother, sister, dad, brother, best friend. They become the ultimate protector of the passengers. And all of our training is about keeping the passengers safe, getting them off the airplane if there's a fire on board, if we have to land in the water, or if we have an emergency landing and our landing gear collapses. We drill this stuff every year. The pilots and the flight attendants drill these procedures. We have procedures set up for hijacking, certain code words to use, certain things you do and don't do. One of the things you wouldn't do is talk on the telephone for a half an hour. And so when I started to see things were just like not right, they were just not right with the whole situation on board, that I just kept going back and back into this, and I'm thinking, okay, the very last thing that a flight attendant would do was the scenario the perpetrators painted for Flight 93, and that was, and if you've ever been inside the cockpit of a commercial plane, you know what I'm talking about. In between the captain and the co-pilot is about a 2-foot square box. It's the onboard flight computer. And they have to kind of climb over this thing between their seats. It's like where our console in our car would be, to get into their seats. So again, thinking of the common sense and logic, if somebody cut their head off or killed them in there, they would be dead weight, and they'd have to pull it over this computer. And there's knobs and there's buttons and toggle switches and all kinds of stuff there on that. And it would be very difficult to get someone else, especially that Captain Burlingame on Flight 77 was 6'2" or 6'4", a really big man. And so I'm thinking, okay, I find out also that the hijackers, they're like 5'6", 5'7". I think the largest one was 5'10". They were mostly all 5'6", which is about the size of most female flight attendants. So I was like, okay, this just is not making sense. And one of the things that you need to know is that if a pilot or a flight attendant had a hijacker on board, there are protocols to follow. One, to keep them out of the cockpit, and two, there's nothing that a crew member wouldn't do to keep that plane and the passengers safe. So on Flight 93, we're to believe that the flight attendants gave up control to their passengers. Remember Todd Beamer and the Let's Roll guys, Jeremy Glick, the judo champ that didn't want to get out of his seat? He was 6'2", also, I believe, 225, and a judo champion, and yet he chose not to help until the very last minute, where they were going to bring pots of hot water and hot coffee in coffee pots into the cockpit and take over. There's no flight attendant in the world that would have allowed that, because when we hand the captain a beverage, we have to do it around his left shoulder toward the window, not over that computer, because even a tablespoon of water in that flight computer would have ruined their day. So
Yeah.
they didn't need hijackers on board. If you're going to allow, no flight attendant would ever allow passengers to take control in any emergency situation, and especially bring 3 or 4 pots of water to pour on the flight computer. No way. I mean, it's something that the perpetrators who planned this, along with the cell phone calls and the FAA protocols and the code words for hijacking, and the certain set protocols for us to follow, to say, do, and not do, were not followed. They were not part of the scenario. When I discovered all of this, then I knew that, well, of course, no plane hit Shanksville. Everybody knows that. There's no plane crash parts. There's no titanium engines. Those are huge airplanes. The 757 is a very long airplane. It's almost 160 feet long. It's just not going to disappear. And then also at the Pentagon, there was no crash site there. And even Jamie McIntyre from CNN said no airplane hit. And so we saw that. Of course, he only got to say that maybe once, and they scrubbed that tape really quickly. But he originally reported also, by the way, that it was a U.S. Airways 737 that hit the Pentagon. He was pretty sure, if anything did, that's what it was. But then later, the whole story, I watched the whole thing, so the story changed. I'm like, how can you miss a 737 versus from a US Air to a 757 from American? I mean, you'd have to have somebody blind telling you what hit, right? There's such a huge difference. And so I started to just see all of this stuff, and then the fact that the crew members were not doing anything they were supposed to do. The pilots, if they knew there was a hijacker on board, or if anything was going on, they heard a ruckus right behind the cockpit door. At the time, that cockpit door was pretty thin. They probably could have heard. If a girl was stabbed right there in front of that bathroom, the pilots would have known there's a commotion going on. They'd have looked out the peephole. They would have squawked their hijack code. And you can always unsquawk it. You can always say, okay, we got it figured out. But they didn't do anything from the cockpit either. These are 4 highly trained military pilots, and we're all aware of hijacking is a procedure. We had set FAA procedures to follow, and I just kept going back to the fact that none of the crew members, there were nearly 30 flight attendants on those 4 planes dispersed, and then the 8 pilots, and all of them highly trained professionals. And with your safety number 1 is your passengers and your plane number 1 before your own life. And the fact that none of them seemed to realize what was going on. The first 2 flight attendants, the first flight attendant, Betty Ong, on Flight 11, she first said something very interesting, and I kept digging through FBI notes and transcripts, written transcripts, and one of the things she first said when she called reservations, which was crazy, because you were always on hold for 20 minutes. You know this as an airline employee. Yeah. The last place you would call is reservations. If you were in a hijacking and you might be only going to have 30 seconds or even 2 minutes on the phone, if you knew that was the situation, the last phone call you would make would be to a reservations agent. So that was really weird. But she said right away, he, as in a singular hijacker, one man, he has mace or something, and we can't breathe in business class. And I know from experience, if somebody sprays cologne or cheap perfume in first class or business class, the entire airplane smells it within 3 minutes. And even worse, if you use something like mace or pepper spray. And then I got to listening, and and Amy Sweeney, the other flight attendant that called, they were on the phone for 27 minutes, never had a problem breathing in coach. And I thought, well, then that means they were not pressurized. And if you are in a pressurized cabin and someone shot off mace, and that's the very first thing she reported, at 8:18. So within that 19 minute range from Boston's Logan Airport, they had mace on board, and they could not have been pressurized. Or she would have been choking and coughing. She wouldn't have been sitting there on the phone saying, this is Betty Ong, I'm 3R, and somebody's been stabbed, blah, blah, blah. And she would have been fighting for air just like anyone else. So if you've ever been around, this happened to me once in Korea, where we actually had tear gas thrown because of rioting going on. And the tear gas was thrown into the lobby of our hotel, and it went into the elevators. And so when we were all coming down for pickup to leave, we had to breathe through fabric, and it and even at that, and it was just residue from out on the streets, and it just kind of crept into the hotel lobby, and it went right up the elevators. So we weren't even close to it. In a closed, pressurized cabin like that, no way did somebody spray mace or pepper spray. Then I started to see that almost all the passengers that called reported pepper spray or mace too, and I'm thinking, no way was that plane pressurized. Not only could you not make a cell phone call, and you couldn't make an airphone call from an American 757 because they dismantled all of theirs by January 31st, 2001. They didn't have airphones on their 757s at American. So when Ted Olson claimed that Barbara Olson, his wife, she called from her cell phone collect, and then he realized, you can't do that. And then she called from the airphone collect. Well, he didn't know, but you can't do that either. You have to swipe a credit card to even get a dial tone or an operator off one of those. But he also didn't know that American had dismantled or deactivated all of their airphones by January 31st, 2001, that off their 757. So I started seeing all these things and putting things together, and I actually teach the reader how to find the location and just to do it online, because one of my missions now was to write this book so people understood how an airline handles the press when there's an accident, and how they protect the passengers' private information and crew members. And they would not give your passenger manifest list out to the FBI or anyone else until your next of kin was notified. That's just it's a corporate thing. It's just a nicety. I think every one of us would appreciate that. That your spouse or your mom or dad don't hear about your death watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC. So it's just a corporate policy, and I just found that was very, very odd that CNN had the passenger manifest and even details of these private phone calls crew members made to their family members. It was just very odd to me from the very first morning. But because I was working, and because I just couldn't face that our own government our government was either involved, or they allowed a foreign intelligence agency, which I also found their heavy involvement in, to do this. And they either worked together or they were complicit and just looked the other way. Now, I've also discovered that the FBI has actually worked to cover up a lot of the details. So in the FBI documents, it later showed up in the Zachariah Moussaoui trial, and also in the 9/11 Commission report hearings that they did. And that didn't start till 2004. Another thing I found is the FBI didn't even interview a lot of people involved until 2004, 3 years later. So you're going to remember what the television show told you happened, because that's what they were doing. And one of the things that I also, in reflecting back, I remember now, and if you just, let's say it's not the 4th of July, so here it is, February. Go out and try to find yourself a 10 by 15 foot or maybe a 20 by 40 foot American flag. I'll just go out and try to find about 500 American flags at your local, wherever, hardware store. Because that day, if you'll remember, and this really struck me odd, that even at the site of the towers where they were demolished, the buildings that were standing around, do you remember those huge, giant American flags? The perpetrators turned the whole thing into like a Super Bowl. That was our team, the red, white, and blue, and we're going to go. And listen, let me tell you this. If it weren't for the cell phone calls made, and it weren't for the details given on those calls, we wouldn't know who our enemy was. We would never have gone to war in these 7 wars that we're in right now. We would not have known. If it really was Al-Qaeda, they wouldn't have needed those phone calls. But the stage, this was like a Hollywood setup. It was a stage that had to be set. They had to tell you by using words. And what I discovered was all of the passengers and crew members used the same wording. They used a terminology that you probably wouldn't say, and I know I wouldn't. Now, I can look at you, Dan, and I can guess between you and your face and your last name. I can guess maybe you're Italian. However, if you were Middle Eastern, I probably couldn't tell if you were Central American, South American, Mexican, Spanish. I mean, how do you look at someone and say, oh, he's from Middle Eastern descent? And those are the 3 words that almost everyone used that day. Yeah. And then I found something else that was really weird. There's a passenger on flight 175. That's the second plane that left Boston's Logan. And he said, there are 2 things that passengers said. One of them said to his father, I think they're going to, well, first he said, they've stabbed an airline hostess. And that's something we've never been called in the United States. We've been stewardesses and then flight attendants since the late 60s. Airline hostess is what El Al uses, some Middle Eastern and some Asian and some European airlines will use airline hostess, but not here. And so I had to look to see, who is this guy? How old is he? Is he 85? Is he from Germany, or is he from Israel, or is he from Japan, or what? Actually, he was just an American. He was only 32. Since the time he was maybe 5 or 6 years old, we in the air had been called flight attendants to him in every news report, every magazine, every story he'd ever seen, or any flight he'd ever taken. We would have been called almost his entire life flight attendant. So I thought, well, what a weird combination of words for him to use. That's really weird. It's like someone told him to say that. And then I started to put down all the words that were used, and all of the calls were very scripted. And so they needed to be, because if you look back right now, I know we're all embarrassed. Those of us that are waking up are kind of embarrassed that we were manipulated and hoodwinked. And really, we were. It was master manipulation. But if you look back now, remember those flags were everywhere. Flags came out of everywhere. And these guys on Flight 93, Let's Roll, heroes. All of their wives were given huge book contracts right away. They made a Hollywood movie out of Flight 93.
Yep.
And so what we were looking at was like a Super Bowl. And if we hadn't had the details that came in from those cell phone calls, we wouldn't have known they were Middle Eastern descent. And we wouldn't have known they had plastic box cutters, and that's how they did it. And we wouldn't have known all of the things that we found out from those cell phone calls. And if it were really Al-Qaeda, they'd have taken that plane out of Dulles and got into that cockpit on takeoff, and they'd have crashed it into the Pentagon within 5 minutes. No one in their right mind would have pressured themselves up against NORAD, the U.S. Navy, the Strategic Air Command, and our system that was supposed to be in place, and fly around for an hour or an hour and a half. They wouldn't. Nobody would do that. That's insanity. And so, and I mean, we remember the golfer who had a medical condition and passed out, and he was flying. They scrambled jets in 6 minutes, and I've had jets scrambled on me before. They happen really quick. They are pretty close to your wingtip, and it's frightening as heck, I have to tell you. But anybody that had any knowledge at all of our defense system would have known that. So why would they take off from Dulles, which is right across the river from the Pentagon, and fly all the way almost to Cleveland or so, and then turn it around and come back and go into this 270-degree corkscrew turn that was impossible for a 757 to be flown at, and then just so happened to meet head-on with the Office of Naval Intelligence, where they were actually investigating Enron, World Crossing, WorldCom, Global Crossing, and the missing $2.3 trillion. Why would terrorists care that those investigations were going on?
Yeah, really.
How would they know? And if they knew about that, they sure as heck knew that NORAD would scramble jets, and they wouldn't be choosing to fly for an hour and a half before they crashed into their site. So I started just using really common sense. And I had no political agenda. I had no religious agenda. I had no agenda but the truth. And so when I started down here, I started digging through this rabbit hole, I like to say. I just went until I found the truth. And what I did was I used my common sense and my airline knowledge. And then I started to see that we were actually asked to believe that on Flight 11, on American Flight 11, the first plane out of Boston, coincidentally, actually had on board not a federal marshal, but an Israeli Defense Forces Special Operations Sayeret Matkal, a highly trained assassin, and he was also trained as an anti-hijacking specialist, and he was trained in hostage rescue. His friends said that he could kill anybody with a credit card and a pen. And yet we are to believe that he was killed by a 5'6" Arab terrorist, 20-some years old, that plotted this hijacking, sitting right behind him in business class, along with another guy. And this guy, the Sayeret Matkal assassin, was actually fluent in English. He grew up in Denver, Colorado. He was fluent in Hebrew because he moved to Israel when he was 14, and he was fluent in Arabic. So he probably could hear those guys right behind him. I mean, if anybody's sat on an airplane, you know that if people are sitting behind you and they're talking, you're hearing their conversation, unless you're wearing some good Bose headphones that you can't hear the jets or anything else, right? So here he was, sitting in 9B on Flight 11, trained assassin, trained anti-hijacking coordinator, and actually fluent in the language that the hijackers were speaking in the road directly behind him. And he allowed himself to be killed by a 1/4-inch blade on a plastic box cutter.
That's what, I mean, even before I, even discovered the real truth and all that, and I'm sitting to myself, I'm like, there was such, 2, 3 terrorists, even if it was 5, okay? Half that flight has to be grown men. And you mean to tell me, and it made me feel pathetic to be an American at that time, that about 30 grown men could not handle men with a simple box cutter? I mean, really? And I was like, wow, is this country really that weak? Then, that's before I really started going down that rabbit hole through the middle there. And, it doesn't make sense at all. And especially when you say the air marshals and whatnot, these guys are well-skilled, well-trained, and meaning they should have noticed that. And that's why I call it just a farce on the whole thing. It really is, and it's ridiculous. Then they want us to believe that the plane was, crashed in Pennsylvania when you have over 8 miles of debris. And last I knew, plane crashes don't produce 8-mile radius of debris, whatever. But we do got to go to a break, the top of the hour break. And if you want to hang tight for a minute, while you listen to the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi, we got Rebekah Roth. Again, check her out, MethodicalIllusion.com. We'll be right back on the Truth Radio Show. And welcome back to the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi. We're in our final hour, and what a show it is. Rebekah Roth, MethodicalIllusion.com. She's the author of Methodical Illusion. I mean, I've seen a lot of 9/11 videos and a lot of 9/11. I read a lot of 9/11 books, and there's, she's bringing up a lot of points that a lot of people are not covering. They, they cover the big stuff and all that, and she's covering big stuff too, but she's also getting to the little nicks and crannies of things as well from an airline employee's perspective, and this is amazing, it really is. And Rebekah, Roth, and you got the floor.
Okay, well, we were just chatting during the break about the Pentagon, and one of the things I wanted to mention is not only did the missile that hit the Pentagon hit right at the Office of Naval Intelligence, investigating the misplaced $2.3 trillion and some other important things, but that actual wedge of the Pentagon had just undergone a really large reconstruction, and it was reinforced with Kevlar and steel at that section. So an aluminum airplane that can really be destroyed by just hitting a bird would never have been able to really make it in there. But it was some sort of, obviously some sort of missile. Now I know that because I know someone that was in the Pentagon and reassured me. Plus I didn't see any crash. There's no airplane parts in front of that building. And let me tell you this, any kind of a cement building, but let alone one that's built the way the Pentagon is. It's like reinforced wall after wall after wall after wall, and the way that it's designed. And then the external wall of that particular wedge was actually reinforced with this Kevlar and steel reinforcement, so that the plane basically would have bounced off. It had been laying there in the lawn. Okay, so and even let's just say that we stretch our mind to think that the plane actually went right into the building. The jets are, I don't know, 8 or 9 feet in diameter. They're pretty good size. They're titanium. That doesn't disappear. There's lots of parts inside the aircraft that, like the landing gear and parts of the jets, that just are not going to vaporize. But that plane would have hit, those two jets are 40 feet apart. I believe it's 40 feet apart from jet to jet. So you'd have actually seen a hole where one jet went through, a hole where the fuselage went through, and a hole 40 feet away from the other hole that the jet went through, where the other jet went through. And that's not what we saw. So, and then of course the exit hole that we saw was obviously about 3 or 4 feet in diameter, or so. It wasn't very big. It sure as heck wasn't big enough for a 757. And I don't know, maybe the traveling public just doesn't understand how, because I've talked to people that swear up and down it was an airplane that crashed into the Pentagon. Well,
look at the dimensions. I mean, like, if you
yes.
take the entrance hole was smaller than the fuselage, and as it goes, the hole goes in, it expands. So
exactly.
It would be the other way around. It'd be a bigger hole going to a smaller. You know what I mean? And that shows signs of a missile right there.
Exactly.
Penetration of a missile.
Well, plus you have people like April Gallup and people that were in there, and even some of the generals and people, they reported smelling cordite, which is an explosive used with missiles. So, but interesting thing, as I kept digging into this Pentagon, this company called AMEC, I believe, AMEC, it was also hired, it's a British company, also hired to do the cleanup at the towers. I thought, well, they just got this, gazillion dollar reconstruction job at the Pentagon. And then, of course, that job, was pretty well trashed afterwards. And then they immediately hired them to go immediately clean up the towers. They were right there on site, immediately taking out all of the beams and all of the stuff that, like, right away. They wanted to get rid of that stuff. And so instead of it being treated like a real true criminal investigation, they just removed all the evidence they could. And that just happened to be one of the companies. So as I'm looking into, that what could have been in the Pentagon, what could have happened, I found also a company that's related to lots of the people involved, and it's a Savannah River nuclear site and a research area where they came up with a nanothermite paint. And you'll remember that right above the floors that the planes actually hit in the World Trade Center towers, they had just recently been treated for fireproofing. And now they could have easily used this nanothermite paint because they're all connected to the companies that are involved with the whole thing. I mean, everyone from the people that took the junk away, all of the, I call it evidence, all the beams and the dust and all of this stuff, immediately off the scene. They're just all connected, man. I can't even tell you how connected this rabbit hole is at the end. It's all woven together, and what I found was CIA, politicians, both sides of the aisle, not just Republicans, not just Democrats. I found banks, I found CIA banks, dirty banks. Remember the BCCI and the Riggs banks and SunTrust and all the banks we heard about in the Iran-Contra? I found all those people, too, all involved in all of this. So as I kept digging down and finding that this was huge. I mean, it's so much bigger than most people even understand. Some people just think, wow, just terrorists, right? Well, I don't even know why. If you understood all of the stock manipulation, all of the corporations involved, there was a startup software company. Well, first, before I go into the startup software company, let me just tell you this. When I realized that the airplanes actually were not, the reason they didn't follow protocols is that the pilots and the flight attendants didn't know they were being hijacked. That's why Betty Ong said these words, "I don't know, but we might be being hijacked." Well, let me tell you this, as a flight attendant of 30 years, if there's a hijacker on board, you know it.
Yeah.
And you know what he wants to do. You know his commands, his demands, where he wants to go, what he wants to have happen. That's why he's a hijacker. And every crew member would know it, because we were all assigned to follow a certain protocol if there is a hijacker on board. For her to say, "I don't know, but we might be being hijacked," told me a lot. It told me she didn't know she was being hijacked, but something was wrong. And that the plane wasn't going where it was supposed to go. Now, remember, this was supposed to go from Boston to Los Angeles. And so I thought to myself, well, what would make her think, well, she should have been busy loading the meal carts and serving breakfast. What would make her think the plane was being hijacked or going somewhere it wasn't? Well, I figured out that they were starting a descent. And what happens now, in the 90s, I can't exactly remember the date, but there was an item sold to, you may know about this, some of the carriers in the United States, and it was called the FTS, a Flight Termination System, and it's basically a plug-in for the flight computer that Boeing equips the aircraft with. It's easy to put on, it's easy to take out. And so European countries, Chinese airline and China, and Germany's Lufthansa Airlines actually had these put on some of their planes by mistake, and they sued Boeing over it. So you can find this information because the flight termination system is the same system that we use here in America on our drones that we're flying around Afghanistan and Pakistan and Yemen and Oman and everywhere else. So we're flying them. And so it allows them to be operated by someone sitting at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada or at even a mobile command unit. They have mobile command units that Dov Zakheim, that comptroller from the Pentagon, he is company SPC. They make the command centers. They can actually take command remotely of 8 drones. And you basically, with the flight termination system on board your computer, you are a drone. You can be taken over remotely. So I remember when this was coming online, and the Airline Pilots Association didn't like this because once the flight termination system, by the way, it was sold to the airlines. Listen carefully to this. In the event that a hijacker got into the cockpit and took command of the airplane, we could land it where we wanted to and get the passengers, crew, and plane liberated by a Delta Force or Navy SEALs or whoever was close by, FBI, whatever. So what happened on 9/11? And why didn't they do that? Because those planes had flight termination systems on their computers, and they were taken over remotely. So the reason the pilots didn't like this idea, and a lot of the airlines didn't put them on, is because once the flight termination system takes over, the airplane's transponder is automatically shut down, and all communication is ended for the pilots. They can't talk to the flight attendants in the cabin. They can't send or receive a message to the cabin. They cannot send or receive a message to air traffic control, other airplanes, any radio frequencies. The flight termination system actually works on a frequency. And so all they need to do is know the frequency of the aircraft that they're at, and they can take over their flight termination system. And then once those planes are taken over remotely, they are landed. And what I discovered is that all 4 of those airplanes were taken over remotely and landed all in one place. And I do say where it is in the book. And I teach the reader how to find that out. Now, people are probably thinking, well, how come air traffic control didn't see them land? And how come we all went to Cleveland trying to follow those flight paths that the FAA put out? Well, here's why. 2 years leading up to 9/11, there were 2 companies that were sitting in the headquarters of the FAA. One of them was called MITRE, M-I-T-R-E, and the other one was called P-TECH, P-T-E-C-H. And P-TECH was an interesting company. It was a young three-year-old company, I guess, when they got into, with the help of Michael Chertoff, into the United States government computer systems. They were a startup company funded by some wealthy gentlemen from Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. But their marketing guy was, I believe, a dual citizen with Israel and the United States, and he was originally, his job was a lawyer. He was an attorney. And he apparently was good friends with Michael Chertoff, because Mr. Chertoff managed to get them into, at the time of 9/11, 22 U.S. computer systems, including the FAA, NORAD, the U.S. Navy, the White House bunkers, and Air Force One, most major banks, and several embassies, just to mention a few. So what they did, and this is an interesting company, in the mid-'80s, you'll remember a software company called Inslaw. Inslaw had a software called Promise. I believe that what we see Edward Snowden talk about now is called Prism, is Promise version 2.0. Promise is a software for tracking, but the Israelis stole it. The head of the Mossad actually stole it from the Department of Justice in 1985. And when the Mossad got a hold of it, they hired a gentleman who's now in prison on a trumped-up drug charge, to put a back door in this computer. The back door in this in this software, the Promise software. The Promise software then just continued to be developed, and I believe that this software that has the back door was what was able to hide the radar blips from those 4 jets when they were actually taken remotely. And here's why I say that. When I kept learning about P-TECH and MITRE, it's called, I kept calling it Mitra, but it's actually pronounced MITRE, like lighter with an M. Yeah. And they're based just outside of Boston and in McLean, Virginia. And they're also involved, they're kind of like a shadow government. They're sort of involved in everything ugly. Everything ugly, actually. And so they were. What their job was that day, there were more than a dozen military war games going on the morning of 9/11. And what their job was to make things appear and disappear on radar, so that the FAA, who runs our commercial planes that we trust to keep us safe, we're not seeing the fake bogeys or targets on the NORAD radar. They were actually making little fake MiG targets or enemy planes show up for the military. And so they actually were able to make things appear that weren't there and make things disappear that were there. Got it?
Wow.
What they could do. And that's how they did it. And what they did was they completely faked the quote-unquote FAA flight paths that they claim those 4 planes took. And you'll remember that if you watch those, there's actually some GIF animated maps that show those 4 planes. And you'll remember at about 8:42, they claimed that Flight 11 and Flight 175, that both left out of Boston, were in a near miss down by Stewart Air Force Base, Stewart International, they call it now. Well, the problem with that is that at 8:42, that's only 4 minutes away from impact for Flight 11. And that's a 15 to 17 minute flight from Stewart to Manhattan. So the only thing that could go that fast is a missile. 690 miles an hour, and I actually did the math, so you can do the math and just see how long it would take an airplane to go from Stewart to, let's just say Newark, because Newark is right across the river. It was about maybe 5 or 8 miles from the end of the runway at Newark. You could actually see the towers. You could see the Twin Towers. So, it's 5 to 8 miles away. So you can just kind of look at the flight time. And so if it took one airplane 4 minutes to get there, why would it take the other airplane so much longer to get there? Because if at 8:42, it would have taken a good 15 minutes for Flight 175 to get there, which is about what I just said. A normal 767 would take 15 to 17 minutes to get to Manhattan. But what they're claiming, and I find this really interesting, at that same time, when the Boston control had a military liaison phone NEADS, the North American Air Defense System, part of NORAD, and tell them about Flight 11 being hijacked, he claims at 8:35 that he sees them 20 miles south of Albany, New York, going 600 knots. 600 knots is 690 miles an hour. There is no commercial airplane that can travel that fast.
No.
The top speed at a 35,000-foot altitude for a 767 is roughly 530 miles an hour. And if you put that airplane at 700 miles an hour, it wouldn't be in the sky. It would have so much structural damage. It's just it's impossible.
And it's breaking the sound barrier on top.
Exactly. So why did a military liaison who's working at Boston Control Center, and this is in Nashua, New Hampshire, he wasn't his first day on the job. He was, relatively experienced. He's a military liaison. Why would he look at a radar screen, see this tagged as Flight 11 going 600 knots, and in his head he would be thinking, well, that's almost 700 miles an hour, and still not have that dawn on him that could not be a 767 by American Airlines? I still can't understand, how could he not see that?
Yeah.
How could he not have seen that, I guess I should say. And so these are the things that I just kept going. And keep in mind, I could have been on one of those planes. I got home not even 12 hours prior to this happening. I commuted to the West Coast from the East Coast. And so, this really hit me close to home. And I guess that's why I couldn't look at it for so many years. And when I got into it, I just kept going back to what the crew had been, what they should have been done, why they didn't do it. And so getting back to now, here's what happened. The planes were actually taken by the flight termination systems on board there. These are really easy to put in if they weren't equipped with them, but I'm pretty sure that both companies had them on board. So they were taken over remotely. You've got the MITRE company and P-TECH in there making the radar data show them disappearing and showing other things like the 600 knot, whatever it was, appearing. And they actually made 22 fake hijackings that day. And so we think, when you look back and you think, wow, they really messed up. Well, they did and they didn't, because the perpetrators who did this, these are not Arabs, these are perpetrators who did this, had total control of the FAA and the NORAD radar screens through this computer system. With a backdoor built into this computer system, they could put child porn on someone's computer. They could put it on mine right now. I'm on Skype. It's pretty easy to infiltrate Skype. They could drain your bank account. They could do anything remotely, and you wouldn't even know. So they were able to make things appear and disappear on the radar screens. And here's an interesting thing. After my book came out, someone came forward that has a terabyte of information, all radar text from 9/11. And I have in my possession now a terabyte of information from 9/11 that is NORAD and the FAA radar in text, and this is the stuff that the MITRE and the P-TECH company were erasing and changing. And all I'm hoping for, so if you're out there and you pray, put this one in your prayers, that I find, or myself and the other researchers that are helping, that we find that they forgot to erase something, and they forgot to cover up something of those 4 planes, and that we find either a descent, or we find a missile, or we find a drone aircraft launched also in that area.
Yeah,
so that's my new project. Something to keep me busy. I mean, a terabyte of information is kind of like trying to read all the books in the Library of Congress. You know, it's a lot of information. And so, but people want to know, well, how did that happen? And one of the things that happened to me also is that I believed in the FAA, and I believed their radar data was correct. And so, like everyone else, I went to Cleveland. And as I started looking deeper, because that's where they basically claimed we went, I found another interesting thing, and I started to look for who could possibly have been the handlers on board, besides that trained assassin that was an anti-hijacking specialist, trained assassin, and hostage rescue expertise. Besides maybe somebody like that, who else would be handlers on board? They had to have people to collect cell phones and to get these people, you know, they've had to pull the people off the planes, right? So getting back to Betty Ong, I went through all of these phone calls that she said. I read articles and magazines and newspapers and CNN, and I went all the FBI stuff, right? Well, lo and behold, if I didn't find the most interesting statement she said, and it's not in every conversation they say, but I did find it in an FBI document, so I trust it's pretty good. She said of the hijacker that she always referred to as he, in the singular, he stood upstairs. And when I heard her say that, and this is within maybe 2 minutes of her phone call, and so this is maybe 22, 23 minutes out of Boston, and I know that a 767 does not have any stairs on board, not even a little ladder, nothing. You can't step up. It's all flat one level. And so I kept reading through that, and I kept thinking, he stood upstairs. What does that mean? Well, there are hangars have stairs in them. Not the only airplane that does is a 747, and they were on a 767 with no stairs, no steps, no second floor. And so I thought, well, then she's telling us they're in a hangar. And what she did was she told somebody with ears to hear, and that's what I heard. They're in a hangar. And then I started to look, and then I needed a runway about 10 or 11,000 feet, the longer the better, and I found it. And so then what I did was I found a flight calculator. I teach the reader how to do this. And I took from Dulles to that same location, and from Newark to the same location. And lo and behold, if those phone calls don't work perfectly with the flight time. So I found the location where the planes were taken, and after I did a radio interview last week, someone contacted me that had actually been there and reconfirmed that I figured it out.
Wow.
So now we kind of have a pretty good idea what's going on, don't we? And the truth is coming out, and lots of people understood. The thing that's really kind of scary to me about what this company did. Now, P-TECH, by the way, just so you know, P-TECH was raided by the FBI in 2003, I believe. They waited a couple years. Now, keep in mind, they were on 22 U.S. Government computer systems, most of our embassies. And so what it is spyware, and it's tracking spyware. So if they want to frame you or empty your Swiss account, not that we have them, but they do. They can do that. So like if a politician isn't doing what they want them to do, they can just drain their Swiss account through the software. It's pretty interesting what all it can do. And now, of course, you know about Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
And I do believe, I know a lot of people think he's this and that and the other thing, but listen, I know what I found, and part of it's in my book, but a lot of it I couldn't put in. And I know what I found, and I'm just a retired flight attendant. I, just put it together with a lot of common sense, and I didn't have any agenda. I didn't have a political or religious agenda. I actually thought it was the 19 hijackers when I started to look until I found out they were alive. So I just wanted the truth, and I just kept digging until I found out how did they do this. And then one of the things that always people want to know from me is, well, in that case, what happened to the planes and the passengers? So one of the things that I also discovered as I went through and I was kind of charting, the words that the passengers and the flight attendants said. And the thing that struck me really odd is that they almost all said that the hijackers had pepper spray or mace or something. And this is what I believe happened. I believe that the handlers on board, and there was 2 or 3, told the crew that they were part of a drill because all those drills were going on.
Yeah.
We got a guy on Flight 175, Peter Hansen, his name. He's the one who called his dad and said the airline hostess had been stabbed. Then he told his dad, I think they're going to fly us into Chicago and fly us into buildings. But he told him that 3 minutes before impact into Manhattan. And if you've ever flown into Manhattan, you know that you're looking at New York for a lot longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what made him think that, but someone had to have told him that they were going to fly. Who would have thought before 9/11 that they would fly planes into buildings? I mean, no one would have conjured that up in their wildest dreams.
No.
Then this other character on Flight 175, his name was Brian Sweeney. He was a F-14 pilot. He was 6'2". He was a take charge March Top Gun fighter pilot. He flew F-14s in the Gulf War in 91. And he called his mom at 9 o'clock, 3 minutes before impact into the South Tower. And his mom said, well, where are you? And he said, now he left Boston, remember, at 8:14. And he at 9 o'clock, he says, this is 45 minutes later, he says, we're over Ohio. Now, remember, they wanted us all to go to Cleveland. It happens to be in Ohio. Well, if you look at Boston to Cleveland, it's about like an hour and 45-minute flight.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's a fighter pilot. He should know that. And if you look out the window and you're 3 minutes before striking the World Trade Center towers, you're going to see New York, New York.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what you're going to see. You're not going to see rural Ohio. And so I got to look and I got to thinking, well, for some reason he wanted to send us all to Ohio. And we all got sent to Cleveland following those crazy faked flight paths. So, okay, who is this guy? I started looking into him just the other day. This is after the books come out, and just for fun, I'm like looking to see who other people on those planes could have been handlers, because they had to have a few people on board to gather cell phones and get people under control. Even though they had light loads, still, if somebody thinks they're going to get killed, they're not going to be happy. And so I'm looking at this guy, and honest to goodness, this is kind of funny. Kind of sick too, but I'm digging it. I'm Google searching him, and I'm reading about him making these phone calls to his mom, and left a message to his wife, but I never found what that said. And his mom says, "Where are you?" He says, I think we're over Ohio." I thought, well, sure, you're a pilot. You should be able to recognize Manhattan when you see it, because that's where he was 3 minutes before impact, or maybe he was over Newark, but he should have known, because it's pretty obvious when you're around New York where you're at. You're sure as heck not over rural Ohio. And as a pilot, he could see that from his window, because he thought he was in Ohio. And so I found that so odd. I found an obituary for him. And I'm reading down through there, and all of the documentation I found printed for this one particular passenger was that he was a quote-unquote business consultant, no corporate name attached to him at all. And I thought, well, that's odd. If most people, if they worked for Marshalls or TJ Maxx or Verizon, it said where they worked in their little ditty from CNN or wherever, the Time magazine. There was lots of stuff to read about all these supposed people, right? So I'm digging down. I'm like about 12 or so obituaries where people wrote in, you were a great guy, gonna miss you, blah, blah, blah. And somebody wrote in, I remember having lunch with you or some such thing in the M cafeteria at the Mitre Corporation.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, wow, interesting. Now, this is the same company that's been in the FAA headquarters that's actually able to make things appear and disappear and is so involved in the entire 9/11. And not just that, they are so involved in what we call the military-industrial complex.
Yep.
That it will blow you away. If you go in their look in their website and see and that's only what they're showing the public they're involved in. They're involved.
Unbelievable.
They're involved in everything.
Well, Rebekah, did you want to take a break, or you want me to skip the break?
Oh, no, we can take one. Yeah, that's good.
All right, we're going to go a break, but we'll be right back on the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi and Rebekah Roth. And welcome back to our final segment of the Truth Radio Show with Dan Bidondi. Again, we got Rebekah Roth, MethodicalIllusion.com. Check her book out. Order the book. I mean, this is a fragment of information of what she's talking about. I mean, you got to read this book. Just the information alone is staggering. It really is. But we got about 20 minutes left, and we're going to let Rebekah finish up. And go ahead, Rebekah.
Okay. Well, so like you said, there's a lot of information. So what I did, I decided I'd write the information in a novel, and so that people could use it as a tool to help wake up friends and family that are maybe just starting to question the official story or maybe are still believing in it. And so what happens with my book is you get into the characters, and there's some fictional stuff in there. And then my character, she's in cognitive dissonance. She's afraid to be called and labeled a truther, a tinfoil hat wearer, conspiracy nut, all of those things, just like a lot of us are, and I was. Until I discovered the truth. And so by the time the reader gets I guess I'll just call it a dump load of 9/11 information, there's a character named Max Hager. Max Hager is the guy who delivers the 9/11 truth, and he talks all about the gold and the put options, and just in passing, and then he actually quotes James Corbett's 5-minute 9/11 in a nutshell, that if you listen to that and you still believe the official story, then there's something wrong with you, that you would actually stretch your mind to believe that not only was a highly trained assassin killed by someone he could hear planning a hijacking and killing him first, but we're also expected to believe that all of this was done. NORAD was completely run in the opposite direction. The FAA couldn't figure out what to do in a hijacking. The hijack coordinator went to Puerto Rico that day and didn't leave anybody his position and his duties, and on and on and on. That this guy, Osama bin Laden, from a cave in Afghanistan with a satellite phone and a laptop, did it all. I mean, that's pretty much a stretch of the imagination. So when I deliver all of the 9/11 truth, I created a character named Max Hager, and he's every truther I've ever met, everybody I've ever read or watched their videos, everybody that's trying to get the truth out. He's a Vietnam vet. Every guy that reads this book loves this man. They want to play him in the movie. Everybody wants it to be made into a movie, and they want to be Max Hager. But he's the truther's truther, and he delivers all of the information and really finally seals up my character, who now believes that, oh my, this was not just planned by our government or people that were within our government, or they actually allowed it to happen, and a lot of it was done by some foreign intelligence agencies. So she's, once she wakes up and stuff, the reader is going to get all of this, and it's delivered in a very fun character, and it's delivered in a non-threatening way. And what I did was I wanted people to go to the internet and start looking, or contact me through email and look at these FBI documents. I'm telling you the truth, and if you want to know what's what's real and what's not, basically the 9/11 stuff is all real. And then I wrapped it into some other things that were real life stories and things that had actually happened to me, and some complete novel stuff. So, but the reason I have people say to me, why would you write a book about 9/11? Why would you care? Because that's so far in the past. And this is kind of what I just want to end this show on is that the past, and you'll remember that as soon as 9/11 happened, we got the TSA, and then we started getting body searching, and we got naked body scanners at airports, and now we have places set up along some of our highways where TSA agents will stop your car and ask for your papers and wonder where you're going, and even search your car for no reason. And we have the Patriot Act right after 9/11, and that became the NDAA, and we're actually drone striking American citizens in the Middle East and have killed a couple. And that just because they happen to be in the Middle East doesn't mean they're not Americans, and that they should have a right to a trial according to the laws in this country. But I think people are starting to wake up and see that our president currently right now is just running amok. I mean, he told us last time he's got a pen and he's got his cell phone, and he's going to just do executive orders for amnesty, illegal aliens, anything else he wants to do. So basically sort of kinged himself, and none of that is what our country was founded upon, what our country is supposed to be. And it seems like nobody can stop this run amok tyranny what we're headed to. And so I think it's important that people understand that in fact there has been a plan for total world governance and world government. I know if you've believed and read the Bible, this is nothing new to you. A world currency will be put in place, a world religion. And the New World Order, when we heard George Bush Sr. talk about that in his grandfatherly way, it wasn't so scary. But if you pay attention to what is coming down the pike and what's happened to our freedom since 9/11, you cannot be blind to this. And if you are, I hope you read this book and wake up, because this book is really out there to give to your friends and family, and hopefully you can get them on board, because we're going to need all the people we can get to start waking up. And what's happened since the book has come out, I've done a few interviews. One, it's gone up to the top of the charts. And I got a personal pleasure out of over this yesterday, actually, that Methodical Illusion was actually above Bill O'Reilly, the Ultimate Bloviator book, Killing Patent. Now, he's got his a bloviating mouth, pushing his books and all that stuff. And what I have is the Truth Movement, and they're sharing this book. I've got emails from people that said, I told everybody on my email list to buy this book. It's 500 people. And so what's happening is that the people are starting to see the truth, and everyone has 6 or 12 or more family friends that aren't waking up, or maybe are just starting to wake up, and they're sharing the book with them. And that is the mission of the book. This is not designed to try to change a no-planer's mind, or Judy Wood's What Happened to the Towers mind type of person's mind. I don't care how they did what they did to the towers. The bottom line is it was an inside job, and our government was either complicit, which makes them just as guilty, while it was being done by a foreign intelligence agencies whose hands are all over this. And they are an ally of ours, and they're a non-Arab. And so what's happened, you'll see after 9/11, might I remind you also that we have gone to a dozen countries, drone striking, killing people, wedding parties, elementary schools, and the like. And we are now, I just saw when I was doing lunch today, I like to turn on the television news to see what they're trying to brainwash us to think. But there are senators right now that are asking for a minimum of 10,000 troops on the ground and back in Iraq. And so you're going to see that things are happening. And as these wars and our troops are set back there into the Middle East, here at home, you're going to see your freedoms are being tromped on. And it is really time that we unite as a people in the truth and stop picking on each other. I mean, I have people commenting through my website, well, you didn't mention Judy Woods. Well, Judy Woods wasn't at 9/11. She wasn't on one of the 4 planes. She wasn't in PTEC. She wasn't in Mitra. She wasn't in the United States government. She wasn't an Israeli Sayeret Matkal agent. So Judy Woods is just a lady that's come out with the theory that, may or may not be. But I do know one thing. whatever they used, it may have been a combination of things. They wanted to make damn good and sure, hope I can say damn on Blog Talk Radio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Damn good and sure that those towers were pulverized. And what really set me going this year, I had written my book almost 2 years ago. I didn't know what to do with it. I hadn't edited through it. I did not know what to do with this information. When I discovered where the planes and the passengers were taken and how it was done, I physically got ill and couldn't write. And then when I got back and I finished it, I couldn't go back and edit because I didn't know what to do with it. I just thought people are not going to be able to believe this. It's as horrific. It's as horrific as the official conspiracy that they showed us on television. But what it is, it's so heartbreaking, I guess, as an American, especially because, a lot of us are really proud to be that, to really take a look at the fact that our government either did this or they allowed it. It doesn't matter which one, they're guilty.
Absolutely.
And to lose that security net, to lose that faith and trust in what we thought we had as Americans. We were set apart from all other countries. This used to be the best place in the world to live. We had freedom here. We could say and do things. Right now, there is laws they're trying to put in place that you can't speak against Jews or Israel. But you can sure tear up Muslims even if you don't have anything but a false accusation, or Christians. And you see there's lots of stuff going on, and even this is in our government right now, to take away our freedom of speech. And if it's okay to badmouth Muslims or Christians, why isn't it okay to speak the truth about Jews being involved or Israel being involved in something? Yeah. That's very frightening. And when you look and see what's going on, every single day we lose our freedom, more things are in jeopardy, and the government's bigger and more tyrannical and out of control. And so when people ask me, why did you write about 9/11? Because it's our future.
It is.
It set the stage for the New World Order and the coming world tyranny, and we don't even, some of us, now I see it, and some people do, but some people don't even see the danger, and it is coming on us as fast as a freight train. Time is short, and what I'd like to tell people is it's so important to first and foremost get it together spiritually, because this is real close to the end, and it could be your end at any moment. It's most important to get it together spiritually, to know where you're at spiritually, then get yourself together so that physically here, if you make it through what's coming, that you have your food and your water and your survivable things, that if you aren't taken out for whatever reason, maybe your location, that you are the one that's solid as a rock on your feet and can help your friends, family, and neighbors, and you know what's going on. That's what we need. We need people that are aware, awake, and in control, because it's going to get very, very chaotic. And I'm going to leave on this note. At the end of my book, I have something in there that the perpetrators, the planners of 9/11 have a plan. And I'm going to tell you this, that I actually read a plan just like this about 2 years ago. And it was in, I believe, an online magazine. I want to say it was a news thing called Ynet, I think. Just the letter Y. And it was an article about the Israeli intelligence intercepting Al-Qaeda. Most of us know who that is now, right?
CIA kind of.
And Al-Qaeda is CIA Mossad operations, so is ISIS. So the article said that Israeli intelligence had intercepted Al-Qaeda's plan to attack 5 or 6 major cities in the United States starting May 2nd, which was the anniversary of Osama bin Laden supposedly being killed a couple years back. 2011 was he killed? I can't remember. But when the SEAL team took him out, right? And
so-called, yeah.
That one. Because he really actually died, according to the Prime Minister of Pakistan, in December 26, 2001.
Yep, Prime Minister Bhutto, yep.
And they killed her. She was assassinated weeks after she said that. So they claimed that this would be Al-Qaeda would mark the anniversary of Osama bin Laden's death. And over a 9-day period, from May 2nd, for 9 days until May 11th, you heard those two numbers, 9/11, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then that they would attack biological, chemical, and nuclear in every quadrant of the United States of America, 6 major cities. I'm reading this article, thankfully, out loud to my husband on a brand new iPad, and I didn't know how to bookmark anything, right? So I'm reading the whole thing, and I said, well, isn't this weird that there's nothing on Drudge Report about this, and nothing on CNN, nothing on Fox, nothing on MSN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, NBC, nothing on American news, and yet it's talking about Al-Qaeda attacking 6 of our major cities, and that the Israeli intelligence had intercepted this. And so I worked that scenario into my book, because I do believe that's the plan.
Well, you can see the writings are on the wall for that. I mean...
Exactly. And so I put that in there because I think that's the nuclear 9/11. I think that's going to happen. They're going to do this over a 9-day period from May 2nd till May 11th. And it could happen this year, because that would certainly disrupt lots of things. It could happen this year or next year, and that would end all life as we know it in the fact that we would be instantly under martial law, because everyone would be a culprit. They wouldn't know who had the chemicals or the biologicals or the nukes or who was the enemy. We'd all be the enemy then, and I think that's what they're trying to set up, quite frankly.
And you picked, I mean, I couldn't even pick a better cover for your book than that. I mean, I explain the same thing. It's that this whole thing is a complex puzzle. That's how I explain it all the time. And when you start putting one piece together, you see another piece, and all of a sudden it becomes clear, and then you realize it all supports each other. You know what I mean? Because without the Patriot Act, for example, you wouldn't have the NDAA, and it just goes on and on. But perfect example of that book right there. And I encourage people to go out and buy this book, methodicalillusion.com, and we're definitely going to promote this.
Let me just say, even though Amazon says it's out of stock, and they might be, but they just go ahead and order it there, or get the Kindle. You can start reading right away. If you want an autographed copy, there's a page you can go onto and either email me with your information or fill out one of those forms. The autographed copy is $20 with tax and shipping and everything, which is pretty close to the same, but I'll autograph it for you and send it out to you. Also, it's available at Barnes & Noble online as well. And any bookstore, if you have a Hastings or a small bookstore, it's on the Ingram list. So even if it's not in your bookstore, they can get it to you in about a week.
Oh, great! Thank you.
But I'm a big fan of Kindle because it's instant. And if you don't have a Kindle, you can get a free app for reading it on your computer, on your laptop, your iPad. There's all kinds of options for different apps, so that works really good too.
Great, and I do want to bring you back on toward 9/11, especially in September, and hopefully we don't, because I strongly believe what you believe. Sometime this year they're gonna pull out all the stops, because you've seen all the false flags. You had the Boston Marathon. I mean, we blew that wide open as a false flag. The shootings going on. The writings are on the wall. They're getting ready for another Pearl Harbor, as they said. That the global elite admitted, hey, we need to stage another Pearl Harbor, and they're getting ready for that. They're going to make 9/11 look like a walk in the park compared to what they're going to do. And again, the writings are on the wall, and I hope enough people read your book to really understand what's going on and to put a stop to this. Because I tell people all the time, sure, it takes years and years of them planning things, billions of dollars, but 5 minutes of speaking the truth could bring down the years and years of planning.
Oh, exactly. Someone sent me today a PDF, this is mind-blowing, of the MITRE company. Their 1995 report is a picture looking up from the street straight up to the one of the World Trade Center towers with smoke coming out the top, just like is on fire, just like we saw it that day.
And you love how they rub it right in your face. It's like, remember the terrorism exercise manuals? Before 9/11, it had the Twin Towers with a crosshair right on the tower. I mean, how more blatant could you get? You know what I mean? But yeah, we're the conspiracy theorists. We should be wearing those tinfoil hats, and you know, they're the ones with the conspiracy
I
theorists.
proudly wear mine now, and I love getting Facebook comments from people that say, I gave my mother your book, and she returned it back to me so I could read it, proudly announced, I'm a 9/11 truther now. And that's what I want to see.
Awesome. And, you know, regardless of the insults we get, we know we're reaching out to more people than, you know, because the people who don't want to, the thing is, most people, they just don't want to know. They just want to keep their head in the sand, and they just label as, you know, I think it's a cop-out just calling it conspiracy theory.
Listen, I say the first step to truth is a real big one.
Yeah.
And you stumble going down. There is no doubt. But the cool thing about it is all of us have taken that step from whether we did it from day one or 2006 or 2009, or you do it tomorrow. The first step is a Lulu, but we're here to help you. If you're just starting to investigate this, if you just want to help others, there's a lot of good people in this movement to help you steady you back on your feet.
Did you hear about the coach for the Seattle Seahawks?
Yes, I'm going to send him a copy of my book.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, you get a lot of people waking up now, and there's reports of certain Hollywood stars. I can't reveal yet because I promised a friend of mine that, you know, rubs elbows with a lot of them, that prominent, you know, Hollywood stars are 9/11 truthers too, and they want to come out eventually, but they don't want to get that into their careers done. They don't want to get that black ball like Charlie Sheen did and everybody else. But anyway, I want to thank you for your time, and if again you want to announce your website one more time and how they could buy your book.
Exactly. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore, just for the asking. They can get it to you in about a week, and you can get an autographed copy, www.methodicalillusion.com. And you can contact me there through email. There's a comment section. And if you have questions, after you read the book, you want to see some documents, ask away. I'm here for you.
Great. And thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you.
And that was Rebekah Roth from MethodicalIllusion.com. Check her site out, folks. I mean, great information. God bless people like her. I mean, God bless these people that come out and talk about this stuff and just put it all on the line, because you're really doing putting it all on the line, because you're taking a risk of being considered a whack job and all that. And people like her, you got people like Wolfgang Halbig, you know, they normal lives, and they come out and know the truth about stuff, and they come out and, you know, Edward Snowden and all these other people that just say, hey, you know what, I'm sick of the lies. I'm sick of all that stuff. And, so anyway, folks, next week, speaking of authors, we got a good friend of mine I became friends with over the years, former Mother of Darkness member, you know, in the Illuminati. She was born into it. Her name is Cisco Wheeler. She's got a book called Behold the White Horse. Go to CiscoWheeler.com, or just Google Behold a White Horse, or go to my website, TruthRadioShow.com, and look under books, and you'll find her book. We're going to have her join us next week on the show here. I mean, tons of great information that she's going to talk about, too. And we're going to bring Rebekah Roth back on the show here more toward 9/11, and probably a couple of times, because there's so much information. We're going to bring other 9/11 experts on as well.
60 seconds.
And we just got to get the truth out. You know, and again, people say, oh, you're beating a dead horse, you know, 9/11 truth. No, you're not beating a dead horse, because you wouldn't have the stuff that's going on here today because from 9/11. You know, if people woke up back then, we wouldn't have the TSA sticking their hands down your pants and everything else, the intrusive body scanners. And Michael Chertoff, he made billions of dollars off this thing, selling the naked body scanners. So, you know, there's a lot that came out of 9/11. And we got about 20 seconds left. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the Truth Radio Show.